In 1956, while Elvis Presley was becoming the king of rock and roll, a young Mexican-American boy in Texas was about to forge his own path to becoming a legend. They would call him the Mexican Elvis, but the real story behind that nickname reveals a struggle that would change country music forever. Before the gold records, before the fame, Freddy Fender made a promise to himself that would shape his destiny: to succeed in a world that wasn't ready for a Mexican-American superstar. Valdemar Huerta's story begins in 1937 in San Benito, Texas, a border town where Mexican and American cultures collided and blended. Born to migrant farm workers, his earliest memories weren't of recording studios or concert halls, but of cotton fields and labor camps. His family followed the harvest, moving constantly in search of work, living in conditions that most Americans would struggle to imagine. This nomadic childhood might seem like a disadvantage for an aspiring musician, but it exposed young Valdemar to a rich tapestry of musical influences. In the labor camps, he heard the traditional Mexican corridos and rancheras that his parents and their friends would sing after long days in the fields. These songs told stories of struggle, love, and resilience, themes that would later define his own music. But Valdemar wasn't just hearing Mexican music. This was the late 1940s and early 1950s, when radio was bringing new sounds into homes across America. Even in the poorest communities, people gathered around radios to hear the latest hits. For Valdemar, this meant exposure to country music stars like Hank Williams and Lefty Frizzell, as well as the emerging sounds of rock and roll. By age 10, Valdemar had already taught himself to play guitar, fashioning his first instrument from an old piece of wood with 6 strings attached. His natural talent was obvious to anyone who heard him play, but in the segregated Texas of the 1940s, the path from migrant camps to music stardom seemed impossible, especially for a Mexican-American child. What set Valdemar apart wasn't just his musical ability, but his refusal to see his dual heritage as a contradiction. While many Mexican Americans of his generation felt pressure to choose between assimilation and tradition, Valdemar embraced both sides of his identity. He could sing a heartbreaking ranchera and then switch to a Hank Williams country classic without missing a beat. This cultural fluidity would become his signature as an artist, but it also made him difficult to categorize in an industry that preferred its stars to fit neatly into established boxes. Was he a Mexican artist who sang in English? A country singer with Latin influences? This ambiguity would prove both his greatest strength and his biggest challenge. By his teenage years, Valdemar was already performing locally, developing the smooth, emotional vocal style that would eventually make him famous. But the music industry of the 1950s wasn't looking for a bilingual Mexican-American artist, no matter how talented. To succeed, he would need to reinvent himself, a transformation that would begin with his name. As the 1950s progressed and Elvis Presley rose to fame, Valdemar watched closely. He saw how Elvis had taken traditionally black musical styles and made them accessible to white audiences. Could he do something similar with his Mexican musical heritage? The answer would come in the form of a new identity, one that would help him navigate the complicated racial and cultural politics of American music. But becoming Freddy Fender wasn't just about changing a name. It was about creating a persona that could open doors while still honoring his roots. And the story of that transformation reveals everything about the barriers Latino artists faced in an industry that wasn't ready for them. What happened next would not only change his life, but would set the stage for generations of Latino artists to come. The late 1950s marked a turning point for Valdemar Huerta. After serving in the Marines for 3 years, he returned to Texas with dreams bigger than the border town where he grew up. He knew that to reach a wider audience, he needed to reinvent himself. The transformation began with his name. Valdemar Huerta was too ethnic for American radio programmers and record executives. He needed something that would sound familiar to American ears while still honoring his heritage. The solution came from an unlikely source: his guitar and amplifier. He took Freddy from his Fender guitar and Fender from his amplifier, creating a name that was both American-sounding and a nod to his musical roots. This wasn't just a marketing decision, it was a survival strategy in an industry where Mexican-American artists were routinely rejected or pigeonholed. As music historian Ramiro Burr noted, Latino artists in the 1950s and 60s faced a choice: either stay in the Spanish language market or completely assimilate to the American mainstream. Freddy was trying to find a middle path. With his new name, Freddy began recording rock and roll songs in English. In 1959, he released Wasted Days and Wasted Nights, a song that showcased his distinctive vocal style, a smooth, emotional delivery that could convey heartbreak with just a slight tremor in his voice. But just as his star was beginning to rise, Freddy faced a setback that would derail his career for nearly a decade. In 1960, he was arrested for marijuana possession in Louisiana and sentenced to nearly 5 years at Angola State Prison, effectively putting his musical career on hold during what should have been his breakthrough years. This prison sentence came at a crucial time in American music history. While Freddy was behind bars, Elvis Presley was becoming a global superstar, and the British invasion was transforming the American music scene. By the time he was released in 1963, the musical landscape had changed dramatically. After his release, Freddy returned to Texas and tried to pick up where he left off, but the momentum was gone. For several years, he worked day jobs, including as a mechanic, while continuing to perform at night in small venues across Texas and Louisiana. It was during this period that he honed the unique style that would eventually make him famous, a blend of country, rock, and Tejano influences. What's remarkable about this period in Freddy's life is his persistence. Despite the setbacks, despite the discrimination, despite the years of struggle, he never abandoned his dream of making music that could bridge his two cultural worlds. But before Freddy Fender could become a household name, he would have to overcome barriers that most artists never face. Barriers of language, culture, and industry prejudice that had kept Latino artists from the mainstream for decades. The story of how he finally broke through reveals not just his remarkable talent, but the changing face of American music itself. The music industry of the 1960s and early 1970s operated with rigid rules about who could succeed. Radio stations were segregated by format, and record labels typically marketed Latino artists exclusively to Latino audiences, regardless of their crossover potential. They wanted to put me in a box, Freddy later on recalled in a 1990 interview. If you were Mexican American, you were supposed to stay in your lane, record Tejano music for Tejano audiences. This industry segregation reflected broader social divisions. Throughout the Southwest, Mexican Americans faced discrimination in housing, education, and employment. Signs reading "No Mexicans Allowed" were common in restaurants and businesses. Freddy's prison record added another difficulty. In the conservative country music world, his conviction for marijuana possession marked him as an outsider. While white artists like Johnny Cash could incorporate their legal troubles into their personas, Latino artists were afforded no such luxury. Language presented yet another barrier. Freddy was fluent in both English and Spanish and wanted to record in both languages. But radio stations and record labels insisted on linguistic purity: English for American audiences, Spanish for Latino markets. Despite these obstacles, Freddy continued performing throughout the 1960s and early 1970s, building a loyal following in Texas and Louisiana. He recorded for small regional labels, releasing songs that blended country, rock, and Tejano influences. What's remarkable about this period is his refusal to compromise his artistic vision. He continued to perform in both English and Spanish, blend musical traditions, and believed that his music could appeal across cultural boundaries. By the early 1970s, small cracks were appearing in the industry's rigid structures. The Chicano movement was gaining momentum, and artists like Santana were demonstrating that Latin-influenced music could achieve mainstream success. It was in this changing landscape that Freddy Fender would finally get his big break. In 1974, he was discovered by Huey P. Moe, a producer known as the Crazy Cajun, who saw in Freddy the potential for crossover success. Moe produced a bilingual country ballad called "Before the Next Teardrop Falls." When "Before the Next Teardrop Falls" hit the airwaves in early 1975, it did something that industry executives had long claimed was impossible. It topped both the country and pop charts while featuring Spanish lyrics. This groundbreaking success wouldn't just transform Freddy Fender's career, it would challenge fundamental assumptions about American music and open doors that had long been closed to Latino artists. release of Before the Next Teardrop Falls in early 1975 marked a pivotal moment not just in Freddy Fender's career, but in American music history. The song's structure was simple, a gentle country ballad with the first verse and chorus in English, followed by the second verse in Spanish, before returning to English for the final chorus. When ABC Records released the single, they did so with limited expectations. The conventional wisdom was that a bilingual song would alienate both English-speaking country fans and Spanish-speaking Latino audiences. Radio programmers were skeptical, with many initially refusing to play a song that featured Spanish lyrics. But something unexpected happened. Rather than rejecting the Spanish verses, listeners embraced them. The emotional delivery transcended language barriers, with Freddy's voice conveying the song's heartbreak in a way that connected with audiences regardless of whether they understood the words. By April 1975, Before the Next Teardrop Falls had reached #1 on the Billboard country charts. A month later, it topped the Hot 100 pop charts as well. Freddy Fender, at age 38, after decades of struggle, had achieved what many considered impossible, a bilingual, bicultural hit that appealed across demographic lines. The success wasn't a fluke. Freddy quickly followed with a re-release of Wasted Days and Wasted Nights, the song he'd first recorded before his prison sentence. This version reached #1 on the country charts and #8 on the pop charts, confirming that his crossover appeal was no accident. This was when the Mexican Elvis nickname began to stick. Like Elvis, Freddy had a distinctive voice that could move effortlessly between genres. Like Elvis, he had a charismatic stage presence that appealed across demographic lines. And like Elvis, he was bringing musical traditions together in ways that created something new and exciting. But the nickname, while flattering, missed something crucial about Freddy's achievement. While Elvis had brought traditionally black musical styles to white audiences, Freddy was doing something even more challenging. He was bringing Mexican musical influences into the American mainstream at a time when anti-Mexican sentiment remained strong in many parts of the country. The mid-1970s were a productive period for Freddy. He released a string of hits, including Secret Love and You'll Lose a Good Thing, toured extensively, and appeared regularly on television. His album sold millions of copies, and he won a Grammy Award for Best Country Performance by a male vocalist in 1975. Throughout this period of mainstream success, Freddy maintained his distinctive approach to music. He continued to record in both English and Spanish, continued to blend country with Tejano influences, and continued to speak openly about his Mexican-American heritage. This authenticity was central to his appeal. Audiences responded to his refusal to fit neatly into industry categories. Freddy Fender's breakthrough changed perceptions about what was possible for Latino artists in American music, but success brought its own challenges. As the 1970s gave way to the 1980s, he would face new struggles to maintain his identity in an industry still uncomfortable with artists who defied easy categorization. The later chapters of his career would reveal both the progress he had helped create and the barriers that remained for the Mexican Elvis and those who followed in his footsteps. The Mexican Elvis nickname followed Freddy Fender throughout his career, appearing in newspaper headlines, concert promotions, and album reviews. On the surface, it seemed like a compliment, comparing him to the biggest star in American music history. But the nickname carried complicated implications about how the industry viewed Latino artists. "I never really liked being called the Mexican Elvis," Freddy admitted in a 1989 interview with the Los Angeles Times. "Elvis was Elvis, and I was trying to be myself, but I understood why people made that comparison. We were both trying to bring different kinds of music together." The comparison highlighted certain aspects of Freddy's appeal: his distinctive voice, his crossover success, his ability to move between musical styles. But it also risked reducing him to a derivative figure rather than recognizing the unique path he had blazed. What made Freddy truly revolutionary wasn't that he was like Elvis, but that he achieved something Elvis never had to attempt: success as a bicultural, bilingual artist in an industry that had historically rejected such approaches. While Elvis faced criticism for appropriating black musical styles, Freddy faced the much more difficult challenge of bringing his own cultural heritage into a mainstream that was often hostile to it. After his breakthrough in the mid-1970s, Freddy's commercial success began to wane as the decade progressed. By the early 1980s, he was no longer topping the charts, though he maintained a loyal following, particularly in the Southwest. This career trajectory might have ended there, another artist who had a few big hits before fading from the spotlight. But in 1989, he joined with Doug Sam, Flaco Jimenez, and Augie Myers to form the Texas Tornadoes, a Tejano supergroup that would win a Grammy and introduce Tex-Mex music to a new generation of listeners. Beyond his own music, Freddy's influence could be seen in the Latino artists who followed him. Selena cited Freddy as an inspiration for her own crossover ambitions. Los Lobos acknowledged Freddy's pioneering role in bringing Tejano influences to American rock and country. And contemporary artists like Casey Musgraves and the Mavericks have continued to incorporate the bilingual, cross-cultural approach that Freddy helped establish. In 2001, Freddy faced a new challenge when he was diagnosed with hepatitis C, which eventually led to the need for a kidney transplant. His daughter Marla donated one of her kidneys to save his life in 2002. Despite his health challenges, Freddy continued to perform and record when he could, releasing his final album, La Música de Valdemar Huerta, in 2001, notably returning to his birth name for this collection of Mexican boleros. When Freddy Fender passed away in 2006 at the age of 69, the music world lost more than just a talented performer. It lost a pioneer who had changed the very landscape of American music. His journey from the cotton fields of Texas to the top of the charts wasn't just a personal triumph. It was a cultural milestone that helped redefine what was possible for Latino artists in America. Freddy Fender's story is at its heart about more than music. It's about identity, perseverance, and the power of cultural bridges. When he died in 2006, tributes poured in from across the musical spectrum, all acknowledging his influence and pioneering role. What made Freddy truly revolutionary wasn't just his commercial success, but how he achieved it. In an era when assimilation was the expected path for minority artists, Freddy found a way to maintain his cultural identity while still connecting with mainstream audiences. He didn't hide his Mexican heritage, he celebrated it, incorporating Spanish lyrics and Tejano musical elements even at the height of his country music fame. This approach created a template that later Latino artists would follow. From Selena to Los Lobos, from Shakira to Bad Bunny, successful Latino artists have built on Freddy's example, finding ways to honor their cultural roots while still appealing to broader audiences. The bilingual, bicultural approach that was once considered commercially unviable has become increasingly common in American popular music. Beyond his influence on Latino artists, Freddy Fender helped expand the boundaries of country music itself. His emotional vocal style and willingness to incorporate diverse influences helped pave the way for the more eclectic country sounds that would emerge in subsequent decades. The Mexican Elvis nickname, for all its limitations, captured something important about Freddy Fender's place in music history. Like Elvis, he was a boundary crosser, someone who brought different musical traditions together in ways that created something new and exciting. Like Elvis, he had a distinctive voice that could convey deep emotion with seemingly effortless grace. But unlike Elvis, Freddy had to overcome barriers of language, culture, and prejudice that the king never faced. His journey from Valdemar Huerta to Freddy Fender, from migrant worker to music star, represents a uniquely American story, one of reinvention, persistence, and the power of music to transcend boundaries. So the next time you hear someone refer to Freddy Fender as the Mexican Elvis, remember that the nickname only tells part of the story. Yes, he had Elvis's charisma and crossover appeal, but Freddy Fender was no imitator. He was an original, a groundbreaking artist who created his own unique legacy. And that legacy continues to resonate in American music today. Every time a Latino artist tops the charts or a country song incorporates Spanish lyrics or Tejano influences. In the end, Freddy Fender wasn't the Mexican Elvis. He was simply Freddy Fender, an artist who stayed true to himself and changed American music in the process.